My experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
If a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. That's what it looks like. I had a bad case of cognitive dissonance because it actually turned out that I admired the people on the Board of Governors. And they were mostly, it was in Grand Prairie, it's not a very big place and it's not very old. And so if you were reasonably successful in Grand Prairie, the probability that you had inherited your money from the aristocracy was like zero, because there wasn't one, right? The whole damn town was 50 years old. So if you had any influence or wealth, you were a small businessman, small to middle-sized businessman, and you knew what you were doing. And I actually admired these people. I thought, well, that's not very good. I admire them, and I don't share their political views. And then there's these other people with whom I hypothetically share political views, and I don't admire them at all. What's going on? And then I read Road to Wig and Pier, and I thought, oh, that's it. They don't like the poor, they just hate the rich. If you haven't had a positive relationship with anyone masculine in your life, and maybe not even with your own internal masculinity, say, you can't discriminate between power and the ambition that serves competence. And so because that's terrifying, because the power, if you have had only negative relationships with men, their capability to use power becomes such a threat that it has to be opposed at all costs, even if it manifests itself within the developmental pathway of your own son. And so some of that's familial breakdown, and then you have a multi-generational pattern of that, and that makes it even worse. Power is an extraordinarily unstable basis to establish a marriage on. Plus, it just doesn't work, because it turns out that women, who are so annoying, are very difficult to oppress, you know. So you can try, but it's not that easy. And I don't think that we've been all that historically successful in doing so. Chimpanzees, who have a patriarchal social structure, their social structures, if they are based on power, on compulsion, they're unstable. And the alpha chimps who use power are very likely to meet an extraordinarily brutal and premature end. So Frans de Waal, the Dutch primatologist, has detailed out this wonderfully. He's shown that even among our closest biological relatives, it's the ability to make peace and to engage in reciprocal interactions that constitutes the basis for a stable polity, even among chimps. And it's obviously the case that that's the proper basis for social relations, especially among free people.
Male gametes. That's what makes me male.
No, your sperm don't make you male.
Then what does?
It's a constellation.
In reality, in truth, okay?
Whose truth are we talking about?
The same truth that says we're sitting in this room right now, you and I.
No, you're not listening.
If I see a chicken laying eggs and I say that's a female chicken laying eggs, did I assign female, or am I just observing a physical reality that's happening in the world?
Does a chicken have gender identity? Does a chicken cry?
Well,
Does a chicken commit suicide? Let's
does that have to do
frame
with-
it, because you're trying
A chicken has sex like any
a chicken
biological
has
organism.
an assigned gender, but a chicken doesn't have a gender identity.
So we assign female to chickens when they lay eggs?
We assume they're female if they lay eggs.
We built a program to help people make a plan. And once we built the program, one of the things we found, for example, was that if you gave it to young men who were entering college, the few months before they went to college, they were 50% less likely to drop out in the first year.
Yeah, it's
and
that's
it's
crazy.
crazy. For a 90-minute exercise, it's like, that's just...
And
if the world had any sense, every single college would have immediately used that upon publication of our paper. But none of them did. And that says something. A friend is someone you can tell bad news to. And they won't tell you why you're an idiot, and they won't interfere with your suffering. They'll just listen, and maybe they'll suffer along with you. Okay, so you can tell bad news to them, and they won't tell you some worse thing that happened to them. They'll listen, and they'll suffer along with you. But a friend is also someone you can tell good news to. And the friend will say, wow, in this veil of tears, something good happened to you. Great, man.
Congrats.
I'm wonderful. It's rare. It's unlikely. Good for you. I hope 10 more things like that happen. And they're not envious, and they're not jealous, and they're not one-upping you. And if you're trying to get your life together, it's actually, if you're trying to get your life together and your friends get in the way, that's actually real useful for you, because you've now identified who your friends aren't. And you might think, well, I can't give them up. It's like, oh, yes, you can. And not only can you, you should, and it would be better for them. Because if they're aiming down and they want you going down with them, there's nothing good about what's happening to them, and there's certainly nothing good about that for you. What about all these risks if I go look for a new job? It's like, yeah, absolutely, man. Those are risks, and they're harsh, and no wonder you're avoiding them. What about the risks for you to stay with this job you absolutely hate? Well, let's think that through. Okay, so I have this dead-end job. I hate it. I'm getting bitter. Where am I going to be in 5 years? I know where, because I've watched this with people. You're going to be just like you are now, except a lot more of what's good about you is going to be gone, and a lot more of what's terrible is going to be amplified. And you're going to be like, in 5 years, you're going to be 10 years older instead of 3 years older.
Yeah.
Right. And
Because
so,
it kills your spirit somehow.
Oh, man. Yeah. So it's like, you think, oh my God, there's a terrible risk in pursuing this new job. It's like, yeah, there is a terrible risk. There's a terrible risk in you staying with your job right now. And so one of the things that's really freeing to understand is that you're screwed no matter what you do. There's no secure path forward. Give it up. It's risk everywhere. Alcohol really is a good drug for coping with anxiety. That's why people use it. So it does two. If you really like alcohol, it does two things to you. It makes you more extroverted and enthusiastic while you're on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve, which is why you have to keep drinking once you start. Because if you plateau, that goes away. So you got to keep drinking. Okay, so that's one thing. It makes you more enthusiastic and more full of positive emotion. And the second thing it does is reduce anxiety. And so if you are a bit more socially anxious, and you also have that positive response to alcohol, which everyone doesn't have, by the way, then it's a great drug. But the problem is, it's a great drug for the moment.
Right.
Right. There's consequences.
Yeah, this sounds when it's not great.